I went to the post office yesterday to pick up my mail, and lo and behold, there was America Magazine and there was Time Magazine. And Time Magazine on its cover reminded me that 50 years ago, we were traveling to the moon. We landed on the moon 50 years ago, yesterday. Time Magazine had it on its cover, a reminder of the cover of Time Magazine 50 years ago. And it had a kind of a joke on the inside. It's a commercial saying that also at that time somebody's sausage landed on one of the plates of the people who were the working at the NASA place in Texas when that happened. So I think Jimmy Dean's sausage was launched at that same time. But anyway, that's sort of beside the point. That's a little aside. But it occurred to me, looking at America Magazine and reading the accounts there and reading the accounts in Time Magazine, that I really personally, as an old man, don't quite understand exactly why we're doing these things. I suppose in the name of science and in the search of the universe to better understand our home, which is God's creation, that has some value. But I have to bring it back to the practicalness of myself, thinking, in the context of the race to the moon again, it seems that we're supposed to be going there again, that the international community trying to beat one another to get there the next time as they were then. I think of Abraham, his journey that we read about, and the stories that we tell within his journey within the Bible. It's part of the first part of the story of the Bible of where we come from as God's people, as the believers in one God, and the various stories that go with that, along with the story of hospitality in today's reading, where Abraham, evidently it took a little while to get this meal together because these three men appeared, but Abraham, he entertained them while the fatted calf was being killed and prepared and so on, and a meal prepared. So this may have taken a couple of days, so there was a lot of stories to tell. And if you lived in the desert and not too many people came by, you wanted to hear their story and they wanted to hear your story. And so maybe they spent a lot of time telling their stories. But as we read the story along, we find out that there was a destination with purpose, a destination that called for preparation, a long time of preparation, getting ready for the coming of Jesus into the world. And even then, the people were not ready. There wasn't room for him in the end. Well, in the context of all of this, I was thinking this Wednesday I'm supposed to be telling stories on the church porch as they inaugurate the school. It's just, Terry's going to be telling historical stories here in church. I'm supposed to tell non-historical stories outside of the church, some true, some maybe not. But I was thinking that stories, and my own stories. And when I was a little boy, before my memory, this story happened, but it was my oldest brother, George. He was also kind of a child pioneer. And your children here that are present, you think about the way you view things and the way you see your journey to one place to another if you're going to go someplace, to go visit and so on. Who are these people? Well, we knew at our launch pad in Louisville that when we went on journey, our destination was going to be Fairfield, Kentucky, because that's where our relatives were. And if we made it to Fairfield, sometimes we went on to Bloomfield because that's where my dad came from. And so we had destinations there. That was the end of our journey. But one of the stories that the old folks in those days used to tell about us, our family, because we had a reputation for liking to eat, and so they had no trouble feeding us. But we would go to the one cousins and a set of cousins in Fairfield. There were three sisters who never married, but they were the hostesses, and they loved to feed, and we loved to go there. But they remembered a story about my brother George, that when he arrived, out back in the backyard, of course, the men were there, and they had the old ice cream mixer there, that they had the ice and the salt and so on, and the crank, and making ice cream. And my brother George went out there, as he was watching the process, a spoon fell out of his shirt. And they said, "What's that spoon for?" He says, "Well, you know we're going to have ice cream. You got to have a spoon, you know." And so that was a family story about my brother that was told on him in his entire life. He never outlived that story, and so I tell you the story now to keep it going. But thinking, you know, in a child's mind, you had to be ready, because if you make homemade ice cream, those of you who remember that process before they had a motor that ran the thing, in which you made the ice cream, you had to be ready, because when it was complete, they pulled that piece out of the thing that was the stirring thing. I don't remember what they called it, but anyway, they pulled that out, and it had ice cream clinging to it. And if you had your spoon ready, you know, you could be ready to get some of that ice cream off of that object. And George knew that. At that time, he probably was just maybe 6 years old. So, but he was ready. He had a spoon with him, prepared from the time he left home. You know, be prepared for this journey, because good things are going to happen at the end of it. You know, as we celebrate hospitality and we think about ourselves not just being hospitable, but in need of hospitality. You know, in our world, we live in a hostile place. You know, in the Record this week, there's a terrible article about the Pew people who do surveys and so on, you know, and surveying the acceptance of religion and different religions in the world, that it's at an all-time low in so many places. One of the worst places is the United States, as far as hospitality toward other types of things other than Northern European origins. You know, and we kind of think about ourselves and how hospitable we might be and how prepared we are, you know, for the migration of peoples. The story of Abraham. You know, these three guys come by in the desert. Well, it's the desert, always the hospitality was big there. First of all, you didn't see very many people. Secondly, if you weren't hospitable to them, you almost were a murderer, because in that time of travel, there weren't motels and restaurants and McDonald's and all that stuff along the way. So if guests came by and you didn't welcome them, then they might die of starvation or die of thirst. And you think of the importance of hospitality in their day, and maybe how long they might stay with them. And as the story is told, it's a story part of the birth of Abraham and Sarah's child, Isaac, and again the story of the Old Testament leading up to the Exodus and so on. The big story of the Bible is launched out of that particular one. For us today, as we gather, we think of our own life story. And important it is in our story that, number one, that we have a sense of destination. We have a sense of where we're going, and that we give that sense of destination to our children, that they know and are confident because of the faith of their parents and the goodness of their parents to give them direction, that they understand as they come along, that they were not just baptized for the heck of it because Grandma wanted them baptized, but they were given direction through the symbols of faith. We need to teach one another and to remind one another that as we gather to pray, what do we come here for? We come to tell the stories. We come to tell the stories, and in the context of telling the stories, we come to break the bread. That's what we're here for, to tell the stories. Tell the stories of long ago, to read letters from Paul and from the apostles as they told their stories as missionaries, to pick up the book and to bring the words of Jesus, to tell the stories of Jesus, that we know through these stories that we have destination, that we have a place toward which we're going. In those stories, I think that George, maybe he knew something as a little boy. Somebody gave him that concept that when we get there, there's going to be ice cream. There's going to be ice cream. When we get there, there's going to be a table. And as children, I remember we talked about that. We always loved to go to that particular household because of their hospitality and the food that they put before us, the table there, and the joy of the family that gathered around that table. how important it is. And you think of going to the moon and so on. Sometimes, why are we going there? Are we going there to escape? To get away from something? Is that the idea? Why do we want to go to Mars? Because it's there, like climbing Mount Everest? Or is it, are we looking for some place to get away from this particular planet because of its hostility? Why do we are so anxious not to have to go back to visit cousin so-and-so or cousin so-and-so? Is it because we find not hospitality, but we find hostility? Is that the reason? Why don't we have dining rooms in our new houses that are used, for sitting around the table and gathering to enjoy the hospitality and the fruitfulness of family life? Why is that? And as we take the dining areas out and McDonald's or someplace in our car where we get fast food becomes the place where we do our primary eating, how can we understand the Lord's table? How can we understand telling the stories that we love to hear and we love to tell by gathering around the family table, gathering around the family home and having listened to grandma or grandpa or uncle or somebody tell us our stories? We need that. We need that to understand who we are and where we're going. If we understand it, well then we understand why it is we come back to this table. Because it's here where we break the bread that Jesus called us to break and to tell the stories that he wants us never to forget. God's love for us and God's call to us to go on journey, not to the moon. He doesn't tell us not to go to the moon, but not our primary journey is not to the moon, but it's to the Lord's kingdom. So I'm thinking myself, and I thought about this, maybe like George, I need to keep that spoon in my shirt so that when I get there and they have ice cream, I'll know what to do and I'll be there to be able to do it.